Thank you, Chair Sanders. I wanted to give you an update really on funding and then really talk about right sizing for institutions and sort of our status as we look forward to moving forward through this fiscal year and academic year. In June, we really talked about how we compare to other states. Since then, the State Higher Education Executive Officers Group has put down sort of a more interactive report, and I thought it had some things in there that are quite interesting. So this is basically what we reported last time, that our budget's fairly big, $2.6 billion in total revenue, and we serve 214,000 students at all our community colleges and universities. But when we compare each other to how we fund, you can sort of see that there are differences. For the United States, about 10%, 3.8, and 0.6% are from other sources, whereas all of our appropriations come from state funds, except for a hair for other sources. This is an important difference. When I worked in Arkansas, they basically had a compact with the local communities. The local communities would invest in buildings. The state would invest in academic offerings and things like that. And in other states, they also have things like a lottery and endowments. So in Louisiana and in Arkansas, they had a lottery for scholarships. As you know, there's a lot of states that have that. Also endowments, when Louisiana started doing a lot of oil leases in the Gulf, they actually endowed the revenue from those to do support for higher education. So there's a lot of funds that come back year after year based on a one-time investment and putting that money away. So anyway, Alabama is at 6,001 in educational appropriations, and that's at 73% of the U.S. average. It looks fairly low. Educational appropriations per FTE since 1980, and this is one of the new things about the data, is it goes back a generation, which is basically, this is the period of time that I worked in higher ed. So what you'll see here is that we had two occasions where we were actually above the national average, and that was back in 1986. George Wallace was governor, and in 2008, Governor Riley. And in both those situations, we were doing great, and every time since then, we've always been trying to, as we move forward our budget, say we just want to get back to 2008 levels, and that's important for us. The scary part is that we're actually at 5.4% below where we were funded in 1980 from state support. Comparing Alabama to the nation during that period of time, we end up with Alabama actually being higher in tuition. We've increased tuition 4.4% on average since 1980 every year. So we are 1.7 times above the national average in tuition revenue, which has repercussions as we have students that have greater student debt, and that debt is actually paid over their first 10, 15 years of adult working life, and that money goes out of the state and doesn't help produce things. So this is something that we need to think about as we move forward. But all is not bad, but we have to think about this in a more holistic percentage. Educational appropriations were down 5.4% as indicated, and nationally they actually are down also. So we're not too bad, but remember we were behind the national for all the times except for 2 years. But notice net tuition revenue. Since 1980, the change has gone up 409%, which seems a little gaudy for a higher ed. And nationally, it only went up 201%. To me, this is something somewhat problematic that we have to address. And if we think about it, our revenue is at 95% change increase compared to just only 37% nationally. So we need to address the fact that our families and our students are paying a bigger share of that. Well, during the summer, there was a lot of discussion about what are we going to do in the fall? What if things don't go well? The good news is we've actually got people back on campus. Things are doing well. Our preliminary enrollment report will be out next week. I've had a peek at that. It actually looks better than all of us had imagined. In fact, some of my conversations with the campuses was about this topic. How do you right size an institution managing their growth or strategic retrenchment? The good news is most of our institutions are sort of right at as they were last year. Some are down some, but not at a significant amount. And so we'll have more details on that next week, but that's helpful. It's still a time to sort of do some thinking because a lot of things have hit higher ed. There's a perfect storm out there that's reshaping higher education. So imagine our institutions and boom, COVID-19 hits. For about 25 years, we've had a decrease in federal, state, and local support. A lot of changes in innovation we have to address. And then, of course, our demography has changed. Everything in blue, light blue, or super light blue in Alabama has a declined enrollment. So if you are recruiting from those areas, it's problematic, and we have to rethink our business model. And then even those that are contributing to our economy by having students from out of state come and pay double or triple, the states in blue are losing enrollment. And of course, like University of Alabama gets a lot of folks from up north, and notice how blue that area is in the decline of enrollment. As we said at our last meeting, underlying financial conditions can cause complications similar to all of us who are dealing with the coronavirus. And then last year we had a situation where even in the fall, before the coronavirus, 6 in 10 colleges missed their fall enrollment goals nationally. And so we have to think about how all this change is going to impact our institutions and what we should do with our budget. So how do campuses respond? And I'm just going to give some suggestions to the campuses that are on the line and help you all as we prepare to think about approving a budget in the fall. I'd say the first step is really to rethink about what is mission critical. This is sort of what we do at home when we have financial matters that require us to tighten our belts. You know, what matters and what doesn't. I'm reminded of Viktor Frankl. He said, be not so concerned with the how, but on the why. For once you know the why, the how shall surely come. And that is the search for meaning. That is the search for our life mission. And institutions need to do that and be reminded of that. So is our current mission, in fact, the mission? A lot of institutions sort of wander beyond their missions. Some actually go into totally different directions. Or is the current mission just survival? And is that a valid mission? What can we do to help? What I would suggest is that we look about how we would change our institution even before COVID-19. What would make it better? And are there activities as the institution participates in? They're really good things, but really, are they mission critical? And do they need to be reconsidered? One way to do this, and this is sort of these parlor games that we do in higher ed as we get together in large groups, or at least we used to back in the day, and we talk about what is important. And the activity that we did at some campuses over the years is say, what is mission critical? And have people put Post-it notes as close to the center of a big circle. And that would be things that we would say is perfectly mission critical. And then things that are not so close, kind of okay, but then things that are outlandish or way out yonder would be a negative number. And then that would help you understand what things should be considered for rethinking or removal as we try to better our ship and keep us going in the right direction. The second step would be to really, after we've really talked about the principles and the ideas, is to let's actually look at the math. And a lot of campuses don't. And in some states where I worked, the state had enough information where we would show a lot of this data publicly. So it sort of compelled the institutions to really think in this kind of depth. In this state, we don't share that much detailed information, so it's up to the campuses to do this. But it's all important to look at the facts. And some important things that are important during this pandemic is to look at your long-term debt and sources for payments. As you know, we had residence halls. All of them have mortgages, or a good chunk of them, and how we're going to pay them back if we're only at half occupancy. Do our student support services have a revenue stream that's sustainable, and are they really focused on what the mission of this institution is about? Academic program viability. Are our academic programs at a size, producing enough graduates that make them viable from an academic perspective, as well from a financial viability perspective? And then auxiliary revenues, which is actually the great difficulty right now for our campuses. I think that their enrollments are going to be okay or close, but they're going to lose revenue from bookstores and cafeterias and residence halls, and that's going to put a big drain on their overall system. And then the question is about reserve funds. Usually institutions will take their leftover money that they have in a year and scarf that little bit away and stack it up. The scary part is when I talked to campuses behind the scenes, there were some that barely had enough money to continue. and they would have to actually borrow to do cash flow and other things like that, where there were other institutions that were very frugal. I have one institution that has at least double of what their operating budget is in reserves, which is actually very impressive and maybe excessive, but we have to think about making sure our institutions do think thoughtfully about having a rainy day fund themselves. The other one is employee information. Know what that is. A lot of institutions have already begun doing furloughs for some areas or early retirements, and there is a way to do that without throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and they need to be thoughtful. If you just say everybody who wants to retire and don't have a whole lot of criteria on that, you may end up with all the great employees who actually have other employment opportunities nearby, wandering off to the next institution, to a private institution near them, and then having a situation where those that don't have a place to go staying. The other thing you have is if you furlough or let young employees go, then you don't have the right mix. So you have a lot of long-term issues later with retirement pensions and deferred compensation kind of things that you have to sort of pay out at the end. So those things have to be thought about as you think about strategy for right-sizing your institutional budgets. Look at things in trends so that they can see about what things are connected. And like I said earlier, look for where you're serving your current population and maybe rethink that. As you can see, Huntsville is on fire. It's a real popular place, Auburn area, of course, too. So those are areas where we've got lots of high school students and a lot of growth and opportunity for recruiting. And I'll give you an example why this is important. We have a lot of regional institutions in the state. This is an example in Louisiana, where all the regions pretty much did a pretty good job of educating their own communities, and that sort of happens throughout the country. But here's a region in Louisiana that everybody wandered off, and it really wasn't good for that local economy, and it certainly wasn't good for the stability of that particular institution. So what is it about the operations at this particular institution that kept it from being a good steward of the local people's education skills and helping them build the local workforce compared to these other regions? And they had to do a lot of rethinking of what they were doing to make it successful. The other thing institutions need to do is look about how are they actually spending their money. And this is a list of actually Alabama universities. And you have a couple universities that are only spending about a third of their student expenditure budget on instruction. So is that a good focus? Does that make sense to us? Normally I would think something around 50% is ideal. And then we have some institutions that are spending it all on libraries and academic support kind of things. Is 26% appropriate? And it might be for a particular institution, but they really need to rethink how they compare and how their operations are different. And then here's two institutions that have very high levels of student support. Are their institutions, students particularly needy compared to others? Or is there just an overemphasis in this area that may not need to be the case as we move forward? And then institutional support. This is a higher ed term for administration. And here's an institution that has a third of their budget going toward administrators. So now we sort of understand why they don't have as much in instruction as they have to pay for the guys in the ties and young ladies with the pearls and all that kind of stuff. And then of course you have scholarships. And if you have to have 1 in 5, 20% of your budget to buy your students in, is that a good business model and is sustainable over time? And I will say that in other states, we actually had institutions that over scholarshiped, and it ended up ruining their ability to be financed in the long run. The other thing they can do is really look at facility utilization. And here's a campus in another state that only used 42% of their classrooms. Can you imagine having buildings, having mortgages, and having half of your buildings not done? And then of course, in addition to that, they had a lot of classes that didn't have but 32% of the classes full, or even 12%. And they had one particular class, which was huge, had 95 students size, and their average enrollment in that class was 31. You can't really have a positive revenue and economic outlook if you're not taking care of the pennies that add up to big expenses for your campus. The other thing is we have a lot more people wanting to do online. If you're offering a lot of classes and you want to have them beamed out, if you do it all during the day, it may not get to everybody. So are you going to need to increase the number of offerings you have at different times? or asynchronously through online experiences. Now, another fun thing to do, all of us are talking about parlor games here, is to think about the life cycle of all of our activities on our campus. And this is from the MBA guys, and as you know, MBAs are heartless business folks who make a career in crushing the thoughts and dreams of organizations. But some of those things are appropriate to apply to higher education business model. Remember we talked about the DART game and what was mission critical? We had things that were very perfectly one, so everything above this line would be something that makes money, that is mission critical. Everything below would be something that isn't. And then this bottom line, effectiveness, is really about dollars. So if you lose a lot of money, you're a -1. If you lose money, you're a +1. So you have a life cycle for any project that you have in life. And the business, the MBA guys would call them dogs. These are the startup costs, the things that drag on one's business. And you always have to have these things when we're politically more pleasant. And when I go to a campus, we talk about poor performers or beginners. Then we have an organization programs that actually are mission critical, but they still cost. They're like a problem child, or sort of like teenagers. You can sort of see they're adults, but they just ain't got it all right. They're still a problem, not only because we have to fund their car payments and their car wrecks, but for other reasons. And then finally, they become stars. They're actually are mission critical. They're real important. They're popular. Everybody wants to go to school with these programs. And that's the ideal place to be for a program, is to have it right here. And you can actually map institutions and show where they are. So here's a star. This is what you're pushing for. And then you have these older projects, which basically were invested. They sort of went through the whole cycle. You don't have to invest them anymore, and they make lots of money for the institutions, but they may not be something that's out on the radar for the public. This is the cycle. And if we don't monitor this cycle, then we end up getting out to kilter. So here's an example of an institution that I actually worked with a jillion years ago, 25 years ago. So what you have is government and sociology, great rising star, or actually a star. Everybody loved it. Everybody came to that college for these type programs, but look how few of them were really popular. Yes, these were popular, but they certainly weren't self-sustaining. And then you had a lot of programs that were just sort of sitting out there making money. But look at all the dogs. Look at all the ones that weren't making money. So what you can do is concentrate on these, the ones that need a little help. And in this case, we took early child education, middle grades, and saw that maybe what if we reinvent this? And what we did is we combined those two programs, which made for organizational efficiency. And we created a program called Early Child and Middle Grades. So when someone graduated, they actually got a credential for both early child and middle grades, and it made them more marketable. So there are things we can do. Today, board members, you will see an institution that is rethinking some academic programs and repackaging it in a slightly different way, which is an example of how to do this. So when building a new plan, decide on the priorities, decide on easy reductions, and really discuss athletic collateral damage to any change. And as you may have heard in athletics, if you try to close an athletic program, there is political damage that happens with you if you're a college president. Otherwise, sometimes you can survive and sometimes you don't. We even actually had a community college try to close some programs recently, and that president got a little heat and he wandered off fairly soon thereafter. And there's other, situations. Program closings, does it matter? In Louisiana, we closed the French program in Louisiana at LSU. That did not go well, but everybody spoke French in Louisiana, and it was a program that was really losing a lot of money. New locations, think about retirements, furloughs, and staffs. So the bottom line is there is a specific fix for every institution. And I want to say to the academic guys and the campus leaders, y'all did a great job this summer. The fact that you are all able to come back with enrollment numbers that are even close to what is out there was impressive. You did have to pivot and make some changes, so I'm impressed with that. If you're interested in some other ideas and improving things, we'll be glad to help you look at the data in different ways to make it helpful. It's really when the institution veers from its purpose that it becomes more susceptible to the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, as Shakespeare would say. With that,